Welcome to AHSC TV's weekly roundup. In this week's program, AHSC TV brings you a number of stories from the region. Boat refugee crisis continues in Andaman Sea. What should be done and who bears responsibility? Post-traumatic stress affects earthquake survivors in Nepal. AHSC TV speaks with Dr. Rajat Mitra. Pakistan's discrimination of women continues, disallowed from participating in local elections. Burmese court convicts 6 activists to more than 4 years in prison for protest. Welcome to AHSC TV's weekly roundup. I'm Josephina Bergsten. Asia is once again witnessing an acute refugee crisis. This time, it's over the plight of the Rohingya people, many of whom are being pushed out from their land in northern Rakhine State in Burma and subsequently ignored and abandoned at every turn. Economic refugees from neighboring Bangladesh, who also include, among others, members of the Rohingya, make matters more complicated in terms of finding a solution to the humanitarian crisis playing out across the Southeast Asian Sea. Since the purge of the Rohingya community in Burma by the military junta led by General Ne Win in 1982, thousands of Rohingya have settled in ghettos in neighboring Bangladesh. Burma has denied citizenship to these people after the enactment of the controversial Citizenship Law of 1982. History shows an exodus the other way too, of an estimated 10 million refugees that fled Bangladesh to neighboring countries during the Liberation War and genocide that raged in the country between 1971 and 73. A substantial number, estimated to be close to 500,000, settled in northern Rakhine and the Chin state of Burma. Intense games of refugee ping-pong between Burma and Bangladesh post-1973 have been playing out for a while now, and today there are thousands of stateless persons seeking refuge in neighboring countries, mostly Malaysia, Thailand and Indonesia. No international organizations, including the UN, and no national governments in the region have the exact number of persons beleaguered in this ongoing worsening crisis. Many forced to leave their shores, either in Bangladesh or Burma, are now stranded in the Andaman Sea after being refused entry into any countries in the region for weeks. Finally this week, after intense international pressure, Malaysia and Indonesia agreed to allow the refugees currently languishing in rickety boats near their coastlines to land temporarily. A comprehensive long-term solution is still to be worked out. Asian Human Rights Commission's Executive Director, Bijo Francis, has this to say on the refugee crisis.
The question who should be responsible, even though it is relevant, what is more important now is what could be done. Now the fact that how many people are we talking about in itself is not a definite number, and nobody can even come out with a close to real number as to how many people are in the boats and wandering around in the seas, where they are exactly, and how many more people will be in the same condition itself speaks to the magnitude of the problem. Now look at the plight of these individuals or families or children and women and people getting stranded in the boats. They are not accepted as persons belonging to any state from the place where they come from, which means that a list of issues pops up immediately, that their housing, food, medicine, education of children, and all forms of exploitation that happens because they are all of a sudden people of whom nobody has any responsibility to protect and provide for. I mean, these are issues that states should not be limiting themselves while addressing as to the origin of these people. These are human beings. These are human beings irrespective of their race, irrespective of the language they speak, irrespective of the history of what have made them, what have made this exodus. People should be willing, I mean states should be willing to help. I think what is more important to speak about today in today's context is how states with their resources can actually help these people so that they don't drown to death. I think what the UNHCR should do at the moment is to be first on the place of origin of where these people are coming from. They should spare no resources to find out how many people are there, under what conditions do they live, what pushes these people to take this leap into the boat and to sail off to an uncertain destiny. I think that is the first thing that need to be done, because getting to know about the circumstances in which they live, the conditions in which they take this uncertain journey, and a very risky journey, is something that we should start with. While at the same time, the good offices of the UNHCR and also the UN and that of the member states and its mechanisms prevailing upon the states where these refugees seek asylum at the moment. I mean, it can be Burma, it can be Bangladesh, it can be Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and even India.
After the devastating April 25 and May 12 earthquakes in Nepal, life has slowly started to return to a semblance of normality. The frequency and intensity of aftershocks is finally decreasing. However, people are still scared and continue to live out in the open, and some remote rural areas have yet to receive assistance from the government. But there are other risks now emerging in the traumatized country. Family members of those who have been lost, especially children, are likely to develop lasting psychological problems. Unverified reports of increase of suicides have been noted. Against this backdrop, AHRC TV speaks with clinical psychologist Dr. Rajat Mitra about post-traumatic stress suffered by survivors in the aftermath of such natural disasters.
I think one of the things that psychologists have seen is that attachment to one's land is one of the deepest attachments in human beings, and any disturbance in that, where you see the land being destroyed, where you see the land being taken away, where you see the land, what you have seen, what you have grown up with as a child suddenly being destroyed, it is one of the deepest griefs. So this grief takes a long time for human beings to get over it, sometimes a lifetime. And through storytelling also, people have been sharing this grief about past earthquakes, how it destroyed their lives. This is a time for the whole community to come together. It is not something one can do on their own. It is important to keep in mind that many of the symptoms that you see at this time in people, like sometimes you get very hyper alert, sometimes you feel angry for no reason, sometimes you cry. You have seen horrible things in front of yourself. These things, these images, sometimes they last a long time, but most often they go away. What is important is not to store it inside, but to talk it over with each other, see the spiritual strengths that are already there in the community and take use of that. And it's important not to blame anyone for this, but to see that it is something that you can transcend. Nepal has had many earthquakes and disasters, and the community also has an inbuilt strength in order to transcend that. Many natural disasters which have taken place in Nepal, in India, in those parts, it is something that people talk about. People grow up with that. People tell you that if this happened, this is how we coped with that. I have learned about earthquakes from my family. They told me how I dealt with that, how they dealt with that. So I know that if, God forbid, one were to happen in my life, it is not something that takes me by surprise, and that is part of communal growing. Sometimes this is also important for the rescue teams and others to, who go over, to know that people are dealing with it, people are coping with it their own way. So it is important not to have that attitude to go with that of helping, which can be very insulting for a population which has an inbuilt understanding of how to cope with mass disasters and traumas. But the community also has a wisdom with which they can deal with, and our task should be to enhance that. Our task should be to be facilitators rather than taking over. And I think that is the message that anyone going to support them should keep that in mind.
Pakistan is next in the program. Despite advancing in many fields previously thought to be male-dominant, women in Pakistan are still not being treated at par with their male counterparts, as has become apparent in a recent local election. Women of Dir district constituency in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, northern province of Pakistan, also known as KPK, were stopped from casting their vote in a by-poll election. Not a single woman from an area having 53,000 registered voters was allowed to exercise her right. The absence of women in a Pakistan by-election has provoked an outcry. According to media reports, around 12 women from the constituency have petitioned the Peshawar High Court asking for the election to be declared null and void. Many fear that the exclusion of women in this local election will set a precedent for the next general election. According to media reports, the practice of barring women from exercising their voting rights has been going on for years in several parts of KPK and the federally administered tribal area, where conservative tribal customs have traditionally barred women from coming out in the public sphere. In some districts in the area, before every election, political party workers take ID cards from female voters and cast votes on their behalf, according to a formula agreed upon by the contesting candidates, blatantly stealing their vote and usurping their right to vote. For more on this story, AHRC TV speaks with human rights defender Javeria Yunus in Pakistan.
Women of the tribal area have now decided to raise their voice against the disenfranchisement. Though the trend has been ongoing for a while now, women in the area are now more educated and aware of their rights as guaranteed under the constitution and religion. In the past also, during the 2013 elections, there were approximately 900 women from Burma Agency, the northern areas of Pakistan, who set up a protest camp outside the office of a political agent demanding the right to vote. Even though the women in Pakistan were given suffrage since the country's inception, we are witnessing a regressive trend when it comes to women's participation in the electoral process. The problem is that in Pakistan, women are not allowed to vote in various constituencies. Disenfranchising women is basically a cultural phenomena that women are not allowed to vote because it is considered a dent on one's honor if the woman is allowed to go outside the home and to vote. Well, there are a number of ways that this can be ensured. First, the election commissioner or the returning officer must ensure that women polling stations are safe and secure because earlier during the 2013 elections, it was alleged that due to the current deteriorating conditions and the threat of militancy, women should not be allowed to vote. But as we have been seeing for a number of decades, that this is basically a cultural phenomenon, not just a security issue that they have, that the protest that they have made. Secondly, if at any constituency the number of votes casted by the women voters falls short of 20%, the returning officer should declare the election null and void and announce re-election. During the 2013 elections, leaflets were basically distributed in the tribal area that declared that it is un-Islamic for women to vote. And I think the state must take measures to counter such edicts that perpetuate discriminatory attitude towards women. I think the state should specifically ask political parties, all political parties, religious or non-religious, to allot tickets to its female workers in a certain proportion, and the political parties not issuing such tickets must be penalized and they should not be allowed to stand as candidates. I think it has deteriorated and regressed rather. We find it that women in Pakistan are being denied their basic fundamental rights, guaranteed under the constitution as well as the religion, like rights to education, health, and being treated as equal to men. And unless that patriarchal mindset is reversed, there is absolutely no hope. I think till this mindset is reversed, it will continue to be one step forward and two steps backward for the women's rights movement.
Finally, we turn to Burma, where the AHRC has noted an alarming increase in the number of cases where peaceful protesters have been charged under Article 18 of the Peaceful Assembly and Peaceful Procession Act. 6 activists who tried to protest at the Chinese embassy in Rangoon against a deadly police crackdown at the Letpadong copper mine were sentenced last week to 4 years and 4 months in prison. The Dagon Township Court has handed down these heavy sentences to 3 male and 3 female protesters. The 6 have been sentenced on 4 different charges relating to a demonstration on December 21 last year in Rangoon, including rioting, assault, making statements causing undue public fear, and failing to get permission to hold a protest. These 6 are the latest to join the growing ranks of fresh political prisoners in Burma. According to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, 157 political prisoners are currently imprisoned in Burma, with 453 activists awaiting trial for their political action. Although Burma's constitution allows citizens to enjoy peaceful demonstration, these rights are being ignored and powers abused by the authorities. The AHRC argues that a truly democratic space would allow people to act and speak freely about subjects government officials may like or dislike. However, in Burma, if the government does not like something a common citizen speaks about, its response is to detain and prosecute. Democratic life is thus still a fantasy in Burma. The judicial system is still under the control of administrative and executive authorities. A gaping hole where the rule of law should be makes matters worse. These 6 protesters were doing no more than exercising their democratic right, and they are innocent of any offense. The AHRC condemns the continued prosecution of peaceful protesters and calls for the release of the arrested people immediately.
သူတို့ကဒါကိုအမြန်ဆုံးအကောင့်တွေပေါ်အရေးယူဆောင်ရွက်စီလိုတဲ့အတွက်အခုလိုဆန္ဒဖော်ထုတ်ရတာအခုဆန္ဒဖော်ထုတ်တဲ့အခါမှာတကယ်တမ်းကငြင်းငြင်းချင်းချင်းဆန္ဒဖော်ထုတ်တာကိုနော်ရဲတပ်ဖွဲ့ဝင်တွေကအင်အားအလွန်အကျွံသုံးတဲ့အတွက်ပြည်သူလူထုကအထိတ်တလန့်ဖြစ်ပြီးတော့ဒီဝိုင်းအုံလာရကနေတစ်ဆင့်ပြဿနာပေါ်တာဆန္ဒဖော်ထုတ်တဲ့အခါမှာလူက1000ဝန်းကျင်ရှိနေပြီမဲ့လို့ဒီ6ယောက်တည်းကိုပဲတရားခံအဖြစ်နော်ဘက်လိုက်အရေးယူဆောင်ရတာဖြစ်တယ်ပုံမှန်353နဲ့တစ်နှစ်149ပုံမှန်149နဲ့တစ်နှစ်905ခါခွေးနဲ့2နှစ်ဆိုပြီးတော့စုစုပေါင်း4နှစ်ပြီးတယ်ဟုတ်ကဲ့ဒါကနောက်တဲ့တမှုပွင့်တာကပုံမှန်16နေရ4လချတော့စုစုပေါင်း4နှစ်နဲ့4လဖြစ်သွားတယ်စစ်ဆက်သွားဖို့အနေထားမှာကိုင်ငံရှင်တွေကတရားစီရင်စနစ်နဲ့ပေါ်မှာယုံကြည်မှုမရှိဘူးလက်ရှိတရားစီရင်ကဒီတက်ကြွတဲ့နိုင်ငံရေးလှုပ်ရှားသူတွေကိုပြီးထောင်ချတဲ့တရားစီရင်ဖြစ်နေတော့အယူခံတို့ပြင်ဆင်တို့ဘယ်လိုတက်တဲ့အောင်မြင်မှုရမှာမဟုတ်ဘူးလို့သူတို့ကယုံကြည်ထားတယ်
That is all for this weekly roundup. For more on these and other issues, please visit www.humanrights.asia. Thank you for watching and see you next week.